Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this, which we have just realised is the very last BRN session of this academic year, before we have our conference in September, which I'm sure Evan will give you some updates on at the end if there is time. But for today, we are delighted to have a long-term supporter, in fact, I think an originator of the BRN, Maria Vassilopoulos, Dr. Maria Vassilopoulos, who has come this afternoon to talk to us about her fascinating research into something called the book war. And I'm going to let Maria talk a bit more about that in her talk. But Maria's got a long history herself working within the book trade, as a bookseller, and then working for places like the Bookseller Journal, British Library Publishing, and now she is sales manager at University of Wales Press. So she is very much integrated into the book trade in the UK, and her interest in and love of book history and book selling history in particular is, yes, one of the reasons why Maria and I clicked all those years ago. Maria, I can't even remember how many years ago it was now, but a long time ago now.
Long time ago,
Uh,
yeah.
so Maria has done a PhD on the book war, and this afternoon she's got some highlights for us so that we can all see why this has become such a fascinating sort of micro history. So Maria, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and I will hand over to you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Sam. I just want to say at the start, I can't see anyone else because my presentation is taking up my full screen. So I'll come into into full view at the end for questions. But at the moment, I think you can see the first page of my presentation, I'm hoping. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Sam. And thank you for having me here. I wanted to talk about how I came into contact with the book war, and kind of then how that spurred on sort of a sort of archival research into the history of the net book agreement and what happened in the book war. And I'm going to pull out some pieces that I found in the archives and kind of explain the relevance of them to the study of book trade history. So I came into contact with it really it was way back, Sam, in 2015, can you believe? So when I was working out what my true topic of my PhD thesis was going to be, I'll provide sort of an explanation more of what the war was and everything in a second, but I just wanted to kind of go through that. At that period, I was kind of a new PhD student, and I was originally going to write about the Bookseller magazine, and that made sense because at the time I worked there and I had access to its complete archive, which at that time was not digitalized. I know it is now, but at the time it hadn't been done yet. And I was really looking forward to getting stuck into this project until something changed my mind. And I was in a staff meeting one day, just in a really dull staff meeting in the Bookseller meeting room. And behind the table we always sat at, there was a set of bookshelves, and they had a lot of old history books that had been given to the bookseller over the years. And I spotted this really thin one by Frederick Macmillan, and it was called the MBA, or the Netbook Agreement, 1899, and the Book War, 1906 to 1908. And I sort of felt compelled to take a look because the book war just sounded quite an interesting event that had been written about. And I was really early in my journey, and I had no idea whether I was really what I was doing at that point. I was kind of searching for things to write about, researching, reading, and I just felt really curious. So I kind of went back into the meeting room that very lunchtime and just read the whole section about the book war, cover to cover. It was a very short section. I just like to point out I wasn't sitting in there reading a massive tome. It's a very short book, but the book itself is actually made of two parts. So the first section is all about the Netbook Agreement, and the second section is about the book war. And you kind of need to know about the Netbook Agreement to understand the book war. So the first section is basically Frederick Macmillan talking about how he devised the netbook system, which would then become the Netbook Agreements. And in the book, he actually republishes a letter that went into the Bookseller magazine in 1890. And I thought I'd just read a bit of it out because it kind of really explains from his perspective why he thought the Netbook Agreement would be a good, or a net book system would be a good thing. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what the agreement was, but essentially it was a resale price maintenance agreement that stopped booksellers from selling books under the retail price, but there were some exceptions, and we'll have a look at that after I've read this bit of the letter. So the letter starts, "Sir, the letters which have appeared in your columns, together with a number of private communications that I have lately received from booksellers, both in London and the country, lead me to think that the time is right for some serious action on the part of all concerned towards the settlement of the underselling question, which, although I have known it as a burning one during the whole of my 23 years' experience of the trade, has recently assumed such proportions that it is rapidly becoming impossible for a bookseller, pure and simple, dealing in current literature, to make a living profit from his business. Although this is no doubt a matter that primarily concerns retail booksellers, it is of course of serious importance to authors, publishers and all concerned in the production of books, and also to book buyers and those interested in the welfare of letters. A well-stocked bookshop is a mental culture, and any disorganisation of trade that renders the existence of such centres difficult or impossible is an injury to the community. For many years, it has been felt that something should be done to get rid of the irregularity of prices and discounts that is the cause of the evil referred to. But the difficulty of any organised action among booksellers is so great that, although much has been thought and said, nothing has been done. It has been suggested that the body who have it in their power to take the necessary steps are the publishers, and believing that to be the case, I'm impelled to write this letter." And Macmillan goes on to explain that his idea would mean the publisher would essentially set retail prices that the bookseller could not reduce on new books, and the bookseller would make their profit from the sale to the customer rather than on excessive discounts offered to them by the publisher. So it just would mean that there was a clearer way that the bookseller would make their profit through the sale of that book, rather than having to ask the publisher for extra discount all the time, which was then squeezing the publisher's profits. And a bit further on, he states, "It therefore seems to me that the first step necessary is to obtain some expression of opinion on the part of the retail trade as to the practicability and advisability of such a new departure. And it has occurred to me that you, sir, as the editor of the recognised organ of the book trade, might perhaps be willing to receive replies to a series of questions issued to the trade generally. If these questions were answered widely, and I cannot believe that any bookseller is without opinion one way or the other, they would form a real basis for discussion at a meeting of publishers, which might be summoned to consider them. For my own part, I have no doubt that with the hearty cooperation of the retail trade, the net system could easily be introduced, and that its adoption would put the whole business of bookselling on a healthy and prosperous basis." So Macmillan's that letter really does give you an idea of where things were at the time of the sort of beginning of the 1890s, or that sort of period. And I actually looked back in the bookseller magazines of the 1880s, and there were loads of letters from booksellers that were disgruntled about a lot of drapers and department stores selling books at like high discounts, and they couldn't keep up with that kind of selling. And so there was definitely unrest in the industry by this point, and it just mounted and mounted. But the whole of the 19th century, there have been discussions about how to regulate book pricing, and there had been an arbitration in 1852, which James Barnes actually wrote a fantastic book called Free Trade in Books, which I used a lot in my thesis, and that kind of gives you the story of how the sort of pricing conversation developed over the 19th century, but nothing had really been put into practice. And it was Macmillan's letter that actually forced a sort of, I suppose, an opportunity for booksellers to meet, and they became an official body that we now know as the Associated Booksellers, or the Booksellers Association. And they then forced a meeting of publishers a year later. So it was 1895 for the BA and 1896 for the PA. And so once those bodies were formed, it was easier then to create some kind of rules and regulations around selling books. And the Netbook Agreement first version was born in January 1900. And that brings me now on to part two of the book that Macmillan had written about the Netbook Agreement and the Book War, because the Book War happened about 6 years after the Netbook Agreement in its first guise had taken taken hold in the industry. So the second section of Macmillan's book is actually not written by Macmillan. It's written by Edward Bell, who was a publisher, and he was president of the Publishers Association throughout the book war. So he was sort of integral to all the decisions being made at the PA at the time. And his account explains all the kind of key dates that happen within, and I'll call it the conflict, even though it wasn't really a conflict. It was a complete war of words. But just to sort of, if you hear me say that, is so I don't have to keep repeating book war every 5 seconds. But within Edward Bell's account, so it's a narrative of how the book war kind of expanded and then tailed off in 1908, is a tale of an American bookseller called Horace Everett Hooper. He appeared on the scene in the British book trade in the late 1800s, and working with, here they are, two handsome men of their day. They collectively working with the deputy manager of the Times, Mobley Bell. They were selling copies of a reprint of the 9th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica at reduced prices in the newspapers. This was all happening pre-netbook agreement, so it's kind of, and it's also a reprint, and we'll come back to some of the terms in the netbook agreements that'll make sense in a minute. And the book, essentially they had a really successful time selling this encyclopedia, and then they decided that they were going to start a book club, which was going to be called the Times Book Club. And the original version of the netbook agreement basically had in it that all new books could not be sold at less than published price, but it had a list of books that were exempt from that terminal, that kind of reference, and they were school books, children's books for children, and what they called dead stock or remainders, which are basically books that have seen the sort of sales drop. It could be the publishers overprinted and booksellers have got lots of this book left and they can't get rid of them. Books that are older than, I think the time limit hadn't really been specified in the first agreement. So, but it turned out they were sort of thinking it would be books that were older than a year. When Horace Hooper and Mobley Bell set up the book club, you'll see the catalogue on the slide on the left. That catalogue actually had the terms and conditions for books going through their system. And so they decided that a book could be considered old once it had been borrowed by 2 subscribers. And that was too soon for the likes of the booksellers and the Publishers Association, who were trying to have a longer gap between when books could be actually discounted. You'll also see on that slide, just to sort of illustrate the fact they did have a premises in Oxford Street, and they moved once and during the book war, but several times after, I think. And this was quite a big premises, and it looks just like a bookshop. So it's kind of, and they had kind of events and things there. They invited the media to come and see it. So from the offset, the book club wasn't sort of a quiet thing that you found in the back of the Times newspaper. It was very much, here we are, here's a catalogue, we've got everything you could ever need, and here's our shop, please, they had reviews in regional news. So the news outlets were already opening up, which during the actual sort of debate that happened in the newspapers would not be a good thing for the publishing industry. And you can see at the end there, books of all sorts at bargain prices. Well, yes, that's a very tame version of some of their advertising copy, and we'll come to that later on in the presentation. So, as I said, the original version of the netbook agreement wasn't particularly tight in terms of time limits on older stock and when they could be discounted. And Hooper and Mobley Bell felt like they'd found a loophole because they decided that, well, their books were old once they'd been borrowed by 2 subscribers. They'd also asked publishers for very good discounts when they began, and they'd been given really good deals. And so they could fill their catalogue. So the first catalogue is full of publishers, sort of all the ones you'd expect, Longman, Murray, they're all in there. They all sign these agreements. and started to supply the club. And the club started in 1905. And so what then happened was there was a series of sort of private meetings and kind of letters back and forth between the club and the Publishers Association. The BA were very unhappy, and they pushed the publishers to do more to stop the book club. Whereas as we'll find out in a second, the PA were sort of a bit more on the fence at first. And then it kind of just exploded in the Times. So essentially, Hooper and Mobley Bell had access to one of the biggest national newspapers in the UK. So because of that, they could put anything they wanted in there at any frequency. So they certainly took advantage of that. And they started just before they kind of got quite political about it, I suppose. They started to put big sales in the newspaper and saying, we've got all these books on sale. And of course, that really riled up the BA, and it came to sort of a bit of a crunch where everybody was disagreeing with everybody else. And then in September 1906, there was a huge advertising campaign from the book club, which we'll go into sort of some more detail shortly. And after that point, there was like Mobley, Bell and Hooper they just went on a huge campaign that played out in the Times, and it spread. Not only did it spread to the other newspapers, the regional ones that had taken interest in the book club opening, it also spread to editorials parts of the newspaper. It had always been in advertising before, but then it became that people wanted to respond about it, and it sort of went into the letters pages. It was being reported on daily at one point through, I think, most of the end of 1906 when it kind of kicked off, and then all through 1907 there was so much source material in the newspapers, in the newspaper archives, and even in the New York Times and the Times of India, so they got involved as well, and other publications, as we'll see. So and it wasn't just sort of the spread of the media sort of coverage, it was also the sort of people that were involved in the book war. Authors became really involved because obviously they're talking about book pricing that links to author profits. So Rudyard Kipling, George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells were all involved, and they were all talking about whether books should be discounted to the reading public. But it also spread to other topics such as publisher profits, the royalty system, the state of book selling, and the state of librarianship. And there were actions that happened beyond these words too, including there was a distribution ban on the book club, and a newfound love from some publishers of creating cheaper books for what then became quite an exposed need. That there were, people that said, yes, we should have cheaper books, and publishers went, okay, we'll make some cheaper books. And they did. And a couple, I think Chatto and Windus, it was, actually built a new facility to do so during the book war happening. And there was lots of suggestions through this time as well about how the industry could improve itself, how it could be more honest and better and look after its authors in a better way. And it was after I'd kind of checked the newspaper archives or newspaper repositories, I found so much material. And then I looked at the size of the book war account in Macmillan's book, and I thought, that's really just quite a short summary because there's so much more to unpack. And every major event that I could see had been mentioned, but it was very, very like in a sentence or in a few sentences. And I thought, in order to get like a fuller picture, I really need to look at the Publishers Association archive as well. Very luckily for me, I still worked at the Bookseller at this point, and they were next door. So they let me come and have a look, and I found even more information about the book war in their account. It was all of the stuff that was the private kind of to's and fro's between the book club and the PA. So it was really good to get that as well, to sort of as a juxtaposition between that and the media coverage. And I also was able to find a lot in the Bookseller archive because I was able to access the older versions of the Bookseller and find more information there. And it even led me to the archives of Hatchard's and Harrods. So yeah, I just started to collect things at quite a rate. Anyway, so I I decided that I absolutely must write about this as for my thesis. In case you hadn't already guessed, that's what I did. And I spoke to Sam about it, and she said, yes, you can, as long as you can find a good question that's going to, going to fit. Because it sounds like you found all this amazing stuff, but what are you trying to tell everybody? And so my question became, how did the book war challenge the identity of the British book trade? And from that point, I sort of embarked on this kind of journey of creating this, I guess, like a microhistory concerning the first time that the agreement was challenged. And it was so soon after it had come in 1900, that was always quite interesting to me. Because if you read lots of accounts of that time, they say the netbook agreement's been very successful, and it's all fine. But actually, the book war kind of proved that there was still a lot to be desired. And my job, as I saw it, was to expand on what we already knew and just draw it out in more detail and see if a deep analysis would reveal even more. So I went through hundreds of newspaper articles and print adverts, circulars, books, photographs of meeting minutes, and letters from the archives. And I ended up with it really did actually take quite a long time to turn that into a thesis, because it was just a lot of source material. And I wanted to sort of just quickly take you through a few. I think I've got about six items that I found in the archives that I really think were things I found and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. This really helps me know more about the story of the book war than I could have found in Edward Bell's account. So sort of why they're valuable. So the first of these was I found a meeting transcript of a meeting that happened in May 1906. And this meeting was the only time in the book war that the two sides, as in the BA and the PA together, and the book club, met in person to discuss the disputes. And Edward Bell did reference the meeting, but he didn't actually explain anything about it. He just said, oh, there's a meeting, nothing really happened, nothing was decided. And he was completely correct. The meeting was a complete waste of time. But the part I thought was interesting was, because there was a transcript in the PA archive, was that it was the relationship between the publishers and the booksellers associations, because in Edward Bell's account, he doesn't really credit the Booksellers Association with much, but actually it was at this meeting they were moving the PA forward to say, we've got to stop this, and the PA was saying, no, it's not up to us, actually it's up to you booksellers, and kind of trying to stand back. And I thought that was quite interesting, because I hadn't seen any evidence of that in any accounts that I'd read. And also it was just really useful to have Hooper and Mobley Bell's actual words away from the newspaper articles that I'd read. They were very much in the newspapers for the whole of the book war, but it was very interesting to see how they were acting in a business meeting scenario. And Mobley Bell was very stubborn. He did not want to deal with the netbook agreement at all, or anything. But the thing I found a bit not sad, but I sort of thought was a bit mean, was that they did say in this meeting that they had tried to interact with the Booksellers Association and have been turned down. And Longman, publisher Charles James Longman, had sort of said, why are you turning them down? You should be welcoming them in, and then it would solve some of these problems. And the president of the BA, which was Henry Kay at the time, he just sort of said, well, no, we don't want to. So, that was interesting. And I should mention as well, just quickly, that the PA did actually try and redo the netbook agreement in October 1906, and they tried to put some better time. So after this meeting, they kind of went away and thought, okay, we're going to try and fix the netbook agreement, because obviously they're not going to sign it, and we've got to just say you can't have secondhand books or used books being defined by your catalogue. And the book club just refused to sign it. So that was the second sort of part to the netbook agreement. It kind of, they tried to fix it and it just didn't work. And there was all this correspondence about that. So there's loads of correspondence about this. Please sign it. No, we're not going to. But please, but no. And it goes on for quite a while. And the second thing I wanted to show you. Oh, sorry. I should have put this on a second ago. This is some of the artwork that was produced whilst the book war was occurring. And there are lots of, I think this was from Punch magazine. There are lots of examples of these. And this is the advertisements of September 1905. So this was the book club's response to the negotiations, essentially, which they decided, no, absolutely failed. And these are huge adverts. I went to the London Library just to see them in real life, and I went to the Times room, and the broadsheets in those days were obviously massive, and these were absolute giant columns. So that doesn't really do it justice. But basically, there were 4 of these adverts. And Edward Bell mentions these in his account, but he gives a relatively nice amount of space to them. But I wanted to read them myself and just see what what the full adverts were saying. And so I did do an analysis of those in my thesis. But they're quite vicious, actually. So there's this first one is called an attempt at monopoly. So they believe that the netbook agreement was basically a monopoly, which they're not particularly wrong, but that was kind of where they started the whole thing. They wanted the PA to look bad. And the top paragraph, it says, the Publishers Association, a body composed of the 60 or 70 leading publishers in the kingdom, has recently passed a resolution which has for its object to prevent the Times Book Club from giving readers the earliest possible opportunity of purchasing at reduced prices books which have been for some time in circulation at the library and which are therefore second-hand. So that was their initial argument against the NBA. The second of the announcements was entitled The Real Evil, and it explained to the reading public that the booksellers, like the book club, were losing out to the netbook agreement because despite being promised protection from discounting, they were no better off since the agreement had been in effect. And they started to accuse publishers of making 800% profits and things like that. The third advert, A False Plea, gave more of Hooper and Mobley Bell's views on netbooks being overpriced. And the fourth advert, A Glaring Injustice to the Bookseller, which you can just see on the screen there, was a subheading as well, The Moral for the Reading Public. It was insinuated that publishers did not care about the consumer and that those who read books can judge and will judge their actions. So they were quite, they weren't really adverts. There was a little bit at the bottom that said, if you'd like to join up to the book club, please do this. But yeah, it was they're very much editorial kind of statements at this stage. And the booksellers being portrayed as trapped and powerless in the system that the PA and the BA have set up. So these were really worth giving the analysis time to. And so I thought I'd include those in my selection. The third, jumping ahead. The third I don't have an image for, but basically there were columns that were done by various authors during the sort of media, like the expansion of the media coverage during the book war. And I picked out the columns of Arthur Shadwell and Hall Caine just to explain a bit more. So Arthur Shadwell was actually an economist and had written many books by the time the book was happening. And after those adverts were in the press, that's when it all kind of kicked off in the newspapers. So that's when people started writing into letters and having their opinions and all this kind of thing. So Arthur Shadwell was in that first sort of tranche of people in the end part of 1906, and his articles, he kind of pretends to be an impartial observer, and he's had access to sort of all the sort of background documents that the Times Book Club and the PA, all the letters I said I'd found in the archive. Well, the Times gave Shadwell kind of access to all of this because in reality he wasn't really impartial. He was being paid by the Times to write these articles. And what he does is he kind of he comes across as like a trusted economist, and he's kind of going through. He says at one point, "I hope these details are not too boring to follow." So he's kind of going through what's actually happened before this explosion in the press, which is probably quite useful for people who are reading the Times and just thinking, "Oh yeah, okay, I don't know what any of this is about." And his articles kind of obviously he's been paid by Hooper and Bell, so he talks about the club as being a new and much needed business model, and it's a natural expansion of the book trade in the changing circumstances of our time. He includes the wording of the original netbook agreement, so people can see that there wasn't anything in there to stop secondhand books being sold at a certain point, which is correct. And he sort of goes through and explains how they've arrived at the situation they're in. And I think he's quite instrumental, because he actually causes a lot of the publishers then to respond in the letters pages and kind of say, well, hang on a minute, that's not, you're saying that you're impartial, but we know that you're not. And that there was a massive, it sort of started the arguments off, if you like. And he kind of also gives an education to the public that maybe they would never have got otherwise. So he starts talking about the events of the 1852 arbitration, which probably not many people would have known about. He kind of brings trade information and that would have gone into the bookseller potentially to a public that's much more general and much more nationalised. So I think it's important to have analysed his articles, because although he was being paid by the Times, he is getting word out there to this public who would be reading it and thinking, oh, maybe he's got a point. And there's the other person, Hall Caine. So Hall Caine was a novelist at the time and very well known. So people reading the Times would have known his name. And he wrote his articles in the Daily Mail. Now, his articles are much more centered around the author, and he is instrumental, or was instrumental, in getting the authors riled up, essentially. So his first column, he talks about how publishers were relied on by authors to distribute their books for retailers and libraries. But he added that in the old days, the middlemen were booksellers alone, and that authors talked of writing for the booksellers. So his beef is with the publishers, essentially. And Caine used the growth of the British book trade in the 19th century to support his view that books were too expensive for the general public. He highlighted that the Free Library Act and the advent of more subscription libraries meant that every town and village had been given access to borrowing books. And like Shadwell, Caine used, because Shadwell did this as well, used the public library as a means of proving that publishers had failed in their pricing, rather than seeing it as an institutional setup that allowed more of the population who are not book buyers to access reading material. In his last article, which was called New Lamps for Old, The Public Want Cheap Books, Caine continued to degrade the bookseller's role. He explained that they were taken in by visits from travellers or sales representatives who were no more than a walking circular, and that bookshops were no longer the centres of literary culture they had been. And he described the newspaper book club as the concept that took book advertisements directly to general public, enabled them to make fully informed purchases, and eliminated the need for booksellers who were perceived as lacking in intellect and knowledge. And you can see how these arguments, one day he says, but authors went to booksellers and got published, and now in his last article, he's saying we don't need booksellers either. So you can see that how sort of this language is going into the national press. And Caine did get a lot of supporters for these articles, and they actually led to a near disbandment of the Society of Authors. A year later, he created a splinter group of authors who tried to form a new association, and they lobbied the Society of Authors, who supported the netbook agreement. And it did nearly end up in disbandment. So it just shows how words can lead to things like that happening in the industry, really. And just leading on from that, there were some other really interesting pieces found in the kind of letters and comments that were being thrown around all over the place in the sort of what I'd say is the meaty bit of the book war between October 1906 and probably September 1907. And I mentioned earlier that authors like Kipling, Wells, and Shaw wrote articles. They wrote about the conflict in their own words, and a lot of these pieces were not just small letters; they were sort of big articles. And Edward Bell said that they wrote the letters, but he didn't really say what they wrote. So I had a look into that, and it was just really fascinating to see the sides that these authors took. So Kipling was published by Macmillan at the time, and he was very supportive of the PA. And he said in one of his letters, "If everyone bought books through the Times Book Club, there'd be no need for the bookseller. It is not to the financial interest of the Times that the bookseller should exist. Every book sold across his counter means one stray sheep among the public not yet gathered into the fold of the Times subscription list." And he kind of created the narrative that a lot of the people that were against the book club started to build on, which was that the book club wanted to have world domination and take over absolutely everything. So you can see how this disagreement over the netbook agreement way back in sort of like the sort of early part of mid part of 1906 is now gradually going into this kind of like all or nothing kind of situation where people are thinking, oh, it's going to be they're going to take over the world. So Bernard Shaw actually was not on the side of the publishers or the and thought the book club was doing a really good thing. And he actually went as far in 1907 to publish a set of his plays with the club to prove his point that authors didn't have to rely on traditional publishing methods. I also did find some women authors who would have been famous in their day. So Gertrude Atherton, American novelist, she was in support of the Publishers Association. She stated in her articles how an unrestricted marketplace didn't generate more sales necessarily. In America, she said she was less bought as an author than she was in the UK. And Atherton and Hooper, being both being Americans, sparred regularly in the letters pages and even got near to swearing at each other on occasion. And one of Atherton's quotes that I quite liked was, "If the policy of the Times is triumphant, it will merely mean a new race of overworked hacks who will take no interest whatever in their fiction beyond its capacity to relieve their pressing material wants." Another women author, Marie Corelli, wrote a piece called "The Mousetrap," which she said was a play on the title of a scene from the Shakespeare play Hamlet. She, like Atherton, discussed the Americanization of the Times and how Horace Hooper was nothing more than created nothing more than a foreign holding company, and that the Americans were trying to gain control over the British book industry. And then that sparked a whole load of debate over that. So you can see there's a lot going on in the papers, and I don't have time to go through it all, but I thought I'd just give you an idea. Moving on to something a bit different. So outside of the newspapers, long form narratives started to appear. So we have Alston Rivers, publisher, and Signs of the Times, or the Hustler's Almanac for 1907. I found this reference in a secondary account of the life of Mobley Bell, which was written by a journalist at the Times called F. Harcourt Kitchin. He wasn't really a fan of the book club, or actually Mobley Bell, it turns out, but he quite liked this book by Alston Rivers, and in a similar style to I've lost my words. Sorry. So Alston Rivers released the Signs of the Times in November 1906, so just in the middle of the real meaty bit of the book war. And it's a parody of the book club. So they fictionalized the business model into other industries for entertainment purposes. So it's like a diary that goes through the year of 1907. It's like an almanac type diary, and it gives you things like each month contains a day-by-day report of another Times club opening. So there's a meat club, and there's a which began trading, which caused a furious protest of the Butchers Association and things like that. So it's funny, and I thought it was interesting because it was an independent publisher of the time getting in on the kind of like saleability of the book war. So that's why I featured it. I wasn't really expecting to find funny things, so it was good to find something. I actually found quite a lot of funny things. Punch was brilliant for funny things, actually. The book war circulars. So this is my last sort of find that I wanted to share, and these are long form narratives from both sides. So what happened was the Publishers Association released the Times and the Publishers. And then just after that, the book club decided to release the history of the book war. So you can see why they probably did that. And Edward Bell did make reference to both of these circulars, but again, not really much about what was in them. So I managed to track them down on eBay, very luckily, because I couldn't find them in the Publishers Association archive or any other archive. And I wondered if I got the Times and the Publishers one first, and I wondered if the book club had done one, and I found an advert in the Times, and then I thought, well, they have. So then I found the copy. And I find these really interesting because, I mean, the Times has, they could use the newspaper, the book club, could use the Times for whatever it wanted to, but it still decided to write its little history of itself and what had happened and why the book war had occurred. And the PA did the same. So it's kind of like both sides laying down to the audience, this is the history, this is why we've done what we've done, and that's why it's okay. And I really enjoyed analysing these against each other to kind of see what the similarities and differences were. And they're quite interesting that something like this came out of what essentially was, a dispute over some terminology in the Netbook Agreement. We now have a whole history of why the Times did what they did and why the PA did what they did. So they were my sort of finds, and I just want to finish by just kind of summarising the end of the book war, which is entirely anticlimactic, to be honest with you. So I was quite disappointed. In 1908, Lord Northcliffe, newspaper baron, wanted to buy the Times, and he just did not want the book war to be happening anymore. So he just said to the PA, it's got to come to an end. We've got to come to an agreement. And in Macmillan's book, so Edward Bell tells the story of the book war, but then Macmillan comes back at the end with his diary entries, because it was him and William Heineman that actually put an end to the book war with Northcliffe's team. And so they sort of went into a period of negotiation in 1908. And one of the stipulations from Northcliffe's side was there was going to be no press release about the end of the book war. It just is going to end. The book club's going to continue, and we just need to find a way to trade with each other. And this is one last archival find I want to share with you, because I was really pleased to have found this. And again, Edward Bell did reference it, but he didn't really talk about it in much detail in his account. But I found the transcript of a meeting that occurred in September 1908, which discussed the ending from a trade perspective. And instead of being transparent about what was agreed, this meeting was actually a select group of people. There's actually not a list of attendees, unfortunately, but you can kind of guess from some of the comments who was who. So I did try and do a little bit of work on that, but it was conducted in complete secrecy. And at the beginning of the proceedings, Edward Bell, who was in the chair, he said, "Gentlemen, as this meeting is to be entirely private, we propose to lock the door when it begins." And he further warned the room not to leak any of it to the press. And at this point, it was then made clear to attendees in the room that the book club had not signed the Netbook Agreement, but they have signed a contract which includes the Netbook Agreement. And I think this is really interesting, because all the way through, the PA just wanted the book club to sign the Netbook Agreement, and at the end they still didn't get them to sign it. But they had this contract around the NBA, and some of the terms in it were that basically the book club got really good trade terms, and there was like a time limit put on secondhand books, but it was more generous than what they'd give the rest of the industry. So that's interesting. And Edward Bell said in this meeting, he said, "We must not, I think, as publishers, allow any grievances that our friends the booksellers may have had against so formidable a rival to obscure the clear issue of the case." So in other words, Bell believed that upholding the Netbook Agreement should be the association's only concern from publishers' perspective, and the BA were the ones who'd had the problem and they just needed to get over it now. Now, the interesting thing about this meeting was that someone asked in the meeting, are we going to tell the Society of Authors what we've agreed in the BA? And the answer was, well, we'll tell them that there's an agreement, but we're not going to tell them any more detail. So again, just showing that relationship between the trade associations, that the PA are very much calling the shots with any kind of legislation or anything like that. And they're not actually going to be honest about what was actually agreed. So once the book war had ended, the conversations about book pricing, obviously, as we know, have continued past the end of the netbook agreement in the 90s and well into the 21st century. Macmillan actually died in 1936, and his book was published in the book I've been referencing throughout was published in 1924. And he didn't see anything else massive happen to the netbook agreement, but as we know, or may not know, but it faced a court case in the 1960s from the Restrictive Practices Court. And then in the 1990s, it was abandoned by booksellers and publishers who wanted to discount. And the EU ruled the agreement illegal in the late 90s, and the PA stopped fighting for it by that point. So today, the book trade and the book club operate in Hooper and Mobley Bell's dream world. In an unregulated marketplace where books can be sold for any amount, there are no discounting rules. Book buyers are powerful agents. They can make or break a publisher's print run depending on the discount they receive. Indie booksellers are often given the worst trade terms and have no choice but to sell books at full price, and the industry remembers the netbook agreement as a thing that happened but could never happen again. Although I think that, as Sam and I were talking earlier, there are some booksellers who would quite like it to happen again. However, conversations are still happening daily on social media about publisher profits and author royalties. And as well as being current news, book pricing has had a varied and interesting history that should be considered important and vital to the understanding what appears at first glance to be nothing more than surface level discussion happening over and over again. The book war gives us researchers a magnified look at how established and official trade relationships dealt with a challenge as well, and how the people of the book trade worked with and against each other in an environment where the competition was not limited to just retail price, but expanded into integrity, validation, and responsibility. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think we could all tell just how passionate and enthusiastic you got about. I mean, I know because I was sort of there on the journey with you, but it's still there, even though
Oh,
it's
yeah.
been a while since you did it. Yeah, I mean, what Maria did in sort of compiling all this evidence, I mean, there were just files and files. I do remember being incredibly impressed with how you captured and saved all this. So I'm sure there will be questions. So Eben, if you'd like to pause the recording for us,